Today's lecture is going to introduce the origins, nature, and uses of theories, and will also give a sort of baseline for how theory is going to be utilized in this course, as well as how it affects our lives overall. Let's begin by looking at the functions of theory. So theories are really useful in our day-to-day life. They help us do a variety of tasks and help us make a variety of decisions. So first, theories can help us organize and understand our experiences. This is something that is really useful to us as human beings because we're often trying to explain our experiences or analyze our experiences, and theories are a great way to do this. They also guide us in choosing which behaviors to study. They're great for determining motivations, they're great for understanding human behavior more deeply, and they're a great testable way for us to determine the influence and impact of technology, of different approaches to communication, of how we interact and build relationships. Theories are, of course, going to help us broaden our understanding of communication and how it operates. As we know, communication doesn't exist in a silo, so understanding how it operates on a grand scale is exceptionally useful. Because of this, it will help us predict and control our own communication and how we go about designing our messages. And then last, theories can challenge current social and cultural realities. That way we better understand how our reality and society is changing overall. So theories are great because they're adaptable, they're ever evolving, and we are constantly forming new ones. Now, your textbook gives a great example of the general model of communication, which is who says what through which channel to whom and with what effect, which sounds confusing. But when you see it laid out in this model here, it's pretty self-evident, right? We have a sender or a message creator, that's the who, that's going to develop and send a message. That's what they say. Then they'll select a medium, which is the channel of communication that they're going to use. This could be text message, this could be word of mouth, this could be an email, but ultimately the medium is selected by the sender. And they're selecting this medium so that it will best reach who they want to receive the message or the receiver. Now, your receiver is going to take that information they've received through that channel, decode that information, and then determine how to respond to that message. So that's the with what effect or feedback portion. Now, this model of communication is a great rule of thumb model for how most communication operates because you'll see that it reflects two-way communication. When we talked about the convergent nature of media today, one thing we did talk about is how interactive media is now compared to how it was in the past. And one thing we see with that is increased feedback, that increased interaction, engagement, response. That's something that is pretty normal for our day-to-day lives as it applies to communication. So since we're really getting deeper into understanding what theory looks like, particularly in media, it's important to understand the theoretical traditions and terms that we'll often refer to when we're talking about media theory. So the first one I want you to be familiar with is media effects. These are the different ways in which media can influence people's thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and these effects can be cognitive, mental. They can influence your behavior, or they can help shift attitudes. So oftentimes when we're looking at the impact of mass media, what we're really looking at is how it's shifted these media effects on people and what sort of changes it created or what sort of changes it influenced. Then we have media criticism. This is where we evaluate content across mass communication messaging to determine how the media represents reality and how its representation actually impacts society. When we're talking about media criticism, what we're really looking at is that advanced media literacy, where we're really spending time being critical of the messaging and thinking about the intentionality, the purpose, and who overall designed this message and what they were trying to do with it. What was the outcome or media effect they wanted to achieve? Media criticism is going to be especially useful in this course because certainly we're going to be observing quite a few theories that look at how the media impacts society. Then we have the characteristics of a good theory, and these are sort of your benchmarks for what makes an effective theory and what we should be expecting of most of the theories we study in this course. First, is it testable? A good theory can be confirmed through some sort of experiment or scientific investigation, right? That's how it becomes a theory. Simplicity. A good theory is as simple as possible while still explaining the phenomenon. That means that a good theory should be well written enough that it is very clear to how it solves the situation at hand or how it explains the behavior, the shift, whatever it is theorizing about. There should also be logical consistency. So that means that a good theory's assumptions, propositions, and boundary conditions are consistent with each other, that it makes sense, that it's based in evidence-based science. It should also have explanatory power, which means that the theory actually explains or predicts reality. So there should be a clear connection there. We also look at something called falsifiability, which is that a good theory should also be able to be disproven through a process. That means that repeated attempts at a scientific experiment or investigation should either confirm or deny the theory. Obviously, we would prefer confirm. Generalizability, a good theory can be applied broadly, and this is more difficult than for some theories, but overall we're looking to see that it applies to the general population or it makes sense for the specific population we're talking about. Realism, a good theory is based in a real world problem, right? It makes sense for the reality we're facing. Beneficial, a good theory can improve the future of those it affects or changes or shifts a problem for. And then last, consistency, a good theory should be compatible with other widely known theories and widely accepted theories. Now, we already started our definition of mass communication last week, but I want to talk a bit about the mass communication process as your book describes it. I really like this process because it's much more thorough in understanding how mass communication functions, and it gives good insight into why there's so many theories that apply to mass comm and just how complex of a structure it is to observe through theory. So first, you'll see the stage that says mass communication begins with senders who are seeking a profit. And I think this is very important context to consider when we're analyzing messaging, particularly commercial messaging like advertising, promotions, commercials, because recognizing that it's seeking to attain profit should really make us start criticizing the media from the get. We already know there's an intentionality there that's meant to influence us, right? It wants profit, so it wants us to buy things. So these senders, they're going to decide on the meanings and goals of a message to be presented to an audience in their specific medium. And again, remember, a medium is just a channel for communication. So that could be TV, radio, social media. There's so many things that fit into that category. So then the intended meanings are going to get encoded by a production special for that specific medium. Again, this depends on the medium you've selected, but they're going to take that profit-focused message and put it into a nice, neat package. Then on number 3, the message gets transmitted through the use of specialized media technologies, again, dependent on the medium, to disseminate it as widely as possible. So the intention, again, is to send it out to a wide blanket of a very large audience, or the largest possible. Then number 4, large and diverse, or what we would call mass audiences of individual receivers will attend to the media and perceive the incoming messages in very selective ways. And I really like this one because it recognizes that though mass communication is communication to large groups, oftentimes the receivers perceive the message as specific to them. Because of this, it feels like it is a tailored message for them. And one thing we have to remember is that the way they interpret or decode this message is going to be influenced by their individualized perspective. So we will see that the message meaning can often shift or change just a bit from receiver to receiver based on their own experiences. Now, the goal, of course, as communicators is that we make our message as clear, concise, accessible as possible so that it diminishes the variety of perspectives that can be taken or the misinterpretations that are potentially potential to happen when we have these individual receivers decoding a message. And then in step 5 of the process, we see individual receivers decoding, and that's where we see the construction of those interpretations. Again, remembering that they're going to be very dependent on their perspectives, but we do our best to communicate in a way that gives the most clarity possible. And then our last step here in the process, as a result of experiencing these media messages, receivers are influenced in some way. That means that this message then has an effect on their feelings, thoughts, or actions. If the focus is seeking a profit, oftentimes it's going to be an action they're trying to influence. And of course, that's getting you to buy something. So what exactly is mass media? I think it's important to understand the dual interpretations we can have to this specific terminology. So first, let's talk about legacy mass media. This is going to be your more traditional mass media, the ones that you've grown up with all your life, that are really the juggernauts when it comes to communication messaging in our society. So we have print publications. This would include the news, magazines, anything you pick up and read, a book. Then we have film, and this is going to include TV, movies, as well as digital content that is video form. And then broadcasting, which is going to be your more radio or audio focus. However, we've of course seen these legacy media evolve, and we have to also consider digital mass media. This is going to include things like websites, which many news organizations have their own websites. This is going to include streaming platforms, which is where we've really seen film and TV move to. Social media, of course, is a mass communication platform because we can connect with thousands of people at once. And then I also consider conference tools like Zoom or Microsoft Teams to be digital mass media because, again, we can communicate to large audiences at once, dependent on how we set up the meeting. Now, when it comes to these mass media, it shows that there's many different medium for us to communicate in. And it also means that as receivers of information, there's a lot of different platforms that we are susceptible to where we get messaging from. And the thing we need to remember when it comes to medium is what we see in medium theory is that not only is the medium selection based off of our audience, it's also part of the message we create. So in terms of the channel of communication we select to disseminate our message, it intrinsically becomes a part of the meaning of the message. How we convey it is just as important as the message itself. Not only does that mean it's important for how we engage with our audience, but it means it carries additional context to that message. We have to remember that ultimately media are extensions of people. What we say, what we message, what we do in our interactions with people are a reflection of ourselves. And the same is true as communicators when we encode messages, even when it's on behalf of an organization or a media organization. So then we have the 3 metaphors for media, and I think these are really interesting because they really describe and capture just how significant a role media plays in our lives, particularly as U.S. citizens. So we see that media is a conduit for content, right? This is the number one way we actually get our information. Media is a language. It reflects the idea that these technologies are an important facet of messaging, an important facet of how we communicate. And then last, media is an environment. And what this really looks at is the idea that the media we use provides specific context. I think a lot about what we see on TikTok and the camaraderie of the platform, particularly as we face a potential ban for TikTok. You would say that the environment on TikTok is much different than, say, the environment on Reels or the environment on Facebook. And that's because media itself has its own environment. It has its own landscape, and in many ways, its own subculture that reflects its users, how it's used to message, and how it's interacted with. So I really like this medium theory because it shows just how deeply these technologies are ingrained into our society and how important they are. Not are they important for us being able to communicate with one another, but they're important in being able to understand what motivates the people around us. If you have any questions about this content or what was covered here in lecture or chapter 2, please feel free to email me.